Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for my talk this morning called From Dolphins to Kings, French Porcelain at the Getty. This talk complements the current exhibition, Porcelain from Versailles, Vases for a King and Queen. And for those of you joining us remotely, you can access captioning settings by clicking the CC icon on your Zoom menu bar at the bottom of your screen. I hope that makes sense. I was told to give that instruction to the Zoom audience. My name is Jeffrey Weaver, and I'm an associate curator in the Department of Sculpture and Decorative Arts here at the J. Paul Getty Museum, specializing in European decorative arts, particularly ceramics of the 18th century. And I've curated a number of exhibitions, including shows on Meissen porcelain, 18th century French silver, Japanese export lacquer, medieval stained glass, and the current exhibition, Porcelain from Versailles, Vases for a King and Queen, which is currently just opened 2 weeks ago at the Getty Center and is open for a whole year now, closing March 3rd of next year, 2024. So I'm particularly excited about this exhibition that brings together two extraordinary garnitures of royal French vases, and I will discuss those in a bit later in the presentation. First, I'm going to do a brief overview of French 18th century porcelain, focusing on four of the prominent manufactories: Saint-Cloud, where production began in the late 17th century, Chantilly, that began about 1730, Vincennes, that began in 1740 before the manufactory was transferred to Sèvres in 1756, where it is still in operation today. I will be illustrating the talk with pieces that are all in the Getty right now, as part of the permanent collection or currently on loan here. And this talk gives me a chance to discuss the extraordinary loans in the exhibition and highlight a number of important recent donations, long-term loans, and new acquisitions that greatly enhance our ability to tell the story of French 18th century porcelain. And this talk allows me to promote and celebrate the recent redisplay of the French porcelain here at the Getty, making this new display makes the objects much easier to see and appreciate, at least in my opinion. I hope you will get a chance to see it and let me know what you think as well. So now to start, it's always good to remember that porcelain was not always the everyday commodity that it is today, and to remember that for hundreds of years it was a very rare, thing in Europe. And to remember how so-called true hard-paste porcelain was first produced in around the year 800 in China, where the essential ingredient, kaolin, a white china clay, was available. Then for hundreds of years, Europeans, not knowing the formula and or having access to the raw materials necessary for its production, were not able to make porcelain and considered the material imported from Asia to be a rare and extraordinary treasure. As you see here, where the Italian artist Mantegna depicts one of the Magi presenting the Christ child with gold in a blue and white porcelain cup. The porcelain is so precious that it is used to contain, you can actually see the little gold coins contained inside the cup. And even in this 17th century painting here at the Getty, Flemish painting, you see that it includes a blue and white Chinese porcelain bowl. It's a type of porcelain that was made in China specifically for export, first to the rest of Asia and then eventually to Europe. And it's containing in this painting other, if you're thinking of Northern Europe, rare items, lemons and pomegranates and an orange. So these are, the porcelain is still considered a very rare material. And then in France, the great demand for an interest in Asian porcelain was reflected in the design of a building that King Louis XIV had erected on the grounds of Versailles in 1670. It was called the Trianon de Porcelaine, and it was decorated with blue and white glazed earthenware tiles. And you have to use your imagination here in this illustration of the Trianon de Porcelaine, which is all in black and white. But you have to imagine that the entire decoration of the tiles and the vases and other figures are all in a blue and white ceramic. They're not done in porcelain because they didn't know how to make it, but it's the colors refer to this interest in Asian porcelain. And given the level of interest and the expense of acquiring Asian porcelain at the time, there was intense competition to found local porcelain manufactories throughout Europe, many of which would receive support from aristocratic and royal patrons. In France, after years of experimentation in the 1690s, Fayence Manufactory, that's making glazed earthenware, just west of Paris at Saint-Cloud, became the first in Europe to produce porcelain commercially. This was such a sensation that the English physician Martin Lister noted it in his Journey to Paris in the year 1698 that was published the following year in London. You see that this Englishman visiting Paris at the time in 1698 wrote, "I saw the pottery of Saint-Cloud, which I was marvelously well pleased, for I confess I could not distinguish between the pots made there and the finest chinaware I ever saw." In the fall of 1700, an article in a Parisian journal describing a visit by the Duchess of Burgundy, who was a member of the French royal family, noted that the factory made fine porcelain, quote, "like that of which does not exist in all Europe." The article goes on to relate how the factory was also visited by, quote, "other princes, noblemen, ambassadors, and all sorts of cognoscenti who came every day to admire the beauty of the pieces made there and which are sold in such quantity to foreign lands." However, despite the hype, this was not true hard-paste porcelain like that made in Asia. Before kaolin, I mentioned before, the essential ingredient needed for porcelain was discovered in Europe. Only soft paste porcelain was made. This paste was a mixture of white clays and a variety of other materials, such as ground glass and chalk, that were fired at a lower temperature than hard paste porcelain that resulted in a ceramic that has a finish and physicality that is literally softer than true hard paste porcelain, but has its own sort of distinct character and beauty, which you see in this Urim basin in the Getty's collection. So a formal porcelain company was established at Saint-Cloud in 1697. It benefited from the patronage of Louis XIV's brother, the Duc d'Orléans, and the pieces made there are characterized by forms of great subtlety and very beautiful ornamentation, especially in underglazed blue and white, which you see here. So in this case, the form and the design are all European. It's the material and the color palette, the white and the blue, and the sharp white of the ceramic that is recalling Asian porcelain. Okay, along with blue and white ware made at Saint-Cloud, other forms and ornament often show the strong influence of Chinese and Japanese porcelain. The decoration on this coffee pot in the form of flowering plum branches is an imitation of designs seen on imported Chinese porcelain. And it is thought that few of these pieces have the Saint-Cloud factory mark on them. So there's one theory that these pieces were even made to be intended to be sold as actual Chinese ware, which is very interesting given the commerce at the time. And this piece is a recent bequest from the estate of Gillian Wilson, which is wonderful for us because Gillian was the initial and long-serving curator of decorative arts at the museum, who was responsible for acquiring so much of the French porcelain in the permanent collection, which we'll see. And we're also, at the Getty here, very happy to show you some recent donations from the collection of early French porcelain that has been recently given to us by Mary Lou Boone, a local collector in Pasadena. And I'm going to show you a few of these pieces which greatly enhance our collection of early French ceramics. And this is this pair of boxes is one from this recent donation. So you see Saint-Cloud produced this pair of small boxes, all in the white porcelain. They had produced a series of figurines based on Asian prototypes, and these boxes are sort of in that vein. Here you see them from the side, and you see the figures have been molded, but the lids, each one is different, and they've been hand-built. These beautiful floral lids have been hand-built. They're not molded, but they're typical of the type of floral ornamentation that you will find on Saint-Cloud ware. And this box is also from Saint-Cloud that has been imaginatively conceived to look like a piece of fabric that has been wrapped around an object. So when you look at all the different sides, you see that it actually looks like a piece of fabric that's been tied at the top. And the decoration is slightly raised. So when you look at these floral vines, they're slightly raised and colored. So the slightly raised effect gives the sense of it being sort of embroidery, so continuing that theme of the fabric. And these are the way the design goes over the seam of the lid to the box, so the design is seen as continuous over the piece. That is typical of what you see in ornamentation in East Asian ceramics and lacquer and textiles as well. And it is a rare example of polychrome work from Saint-Cloud. Now, each manufactory that was founded in the early 18th century in France developed its own closely guarded recipe for soft-paste porcelain, and competition among the firms was intense, complicated by the fact that many artists moved from one manufactory to the other. And the porcelain manufactory at Chantilly, this piece was made at Chantilly, north of Paris, was established around 1730, near the Chateau of Chantilly, the ancestral home of Louis-Henri de Bourbon, the Prince de Condé. In 1726, King Louis XV had banished the prince to his estate, where he became an important patron of the arts and supported the founding of the porcelain manufactory. He formed a particularly large and important collection of Japanese ceramics that inspired much of the early production at Chantilly. And in this piece, this small egg cup, you see it's imaginatively formed as a dolphin, its head resting on a crest of waves, and then it supports a small cup that was meant to hold an egg, obviously, and it has this design of a dragon chasing a butterfly. So the overall form is based on shapes that were seen in Chinese export porcelain, and the motif of the dragon is based on motifs seen on Japanese porcelain that is also taken from an ancient Chinese motif as well. So here you see a side view of the dolphin cup, and underneath the mark, which at Chantilly, the factory mark, you see here is a red hunting horn, and Chantilly was in the middle of a famous forest, which was famous for its hunting. And this large dish, also made at Chantilly, is looking specifically at a type of Japanese ware known as kakiemon ware, which is characterized by asymmetrical, sparsely displayed motifs using just a limited palette against a white background such as this. So this is recalling kakiemon type ceramics that the Duke had in his own collection. We don't know of another example of this piece. It is remarkably modeled in that it has this raised rim here in the branches and the leaves. And you have to remember that ceramics the making of porcelain and ceramics involved a lot of risk. A lot of the pieces did not emerge from the kilns intact, or they had damage and shrinking and firing cracks and things like that. So when you look closely at this piece, and you'll be able to see it in the gallery, you will see right here where you have this motif of the branch that's been painted as if it's continuing down the side of the dish. If you look really close, you can see there's actually a crack there. And that little crack is a firing crack, was a part of the production process. And then they've, instead of discarding the piece with this flaw, they've incorporated the painted decoration to mask that. And so one of these charming and imaginative details you will see in some of these early ceramics. I just want to go back and show you the beautiful size and design of this overall dish. And here another piece made at Chantilly from the Boone collection, this marvelous bottle cooler. It's quite small, but the decoration, you can see Chantilly is characteristic for its slightly more matte white paste than you saw at Saint-Cloud. And the design motifs in this case, this figure especially, are seen on some of the Japanese pieces that were in the Duke's collection. And there are other that the artists at Chantilly have just copied onto their new wares. And the other Asian inspiration you see is these dragon handles here, and this lion. And then if you turn the piece around, you'll see these beautifully painted pomegranates. And then on the other side, there's no sort of front or back, this beautifully painted figure holding a lantern outside of a window. So this is a window here, and here he's holding a lantern. And then, so those are some of the highlights from the donation from Mary Lou Boone. And one of the great masterpieces in the entire collection of French decorative arts, not just the ceramics, is this large wall clock. It's almost 30 inches high, that was made at Chantilly, that was acquired by Julian Wilson in the 1980s. But you see, you have to look closely at it and see what a marvelous design it is, in that it has a dragon up here, and here is a goose, I guess, and a monkey down here, all intertwined in this fabulous Rococo composition of vines and flowers and trailing leaves and things like that, so that you almost don't even see the clock initially. And the clock was known as a pendule d'alcove. It was meant for a bed alcove and would have had a string running down from this flower here that would hang down, and in the middle of the night, the clock didn't strike during the night because you needed to get your sleep. So if you woke up in the night and wanted to know what time it was, you could reach up, grab the string, and it would ring to the nearest hour and a quarter. So moving on from Chantilly to Vincennes, at the same year that clock was made, around 1740, a small group of French craftsmen had set up an experimental workshop to produce porcelain in the semi-abandoned royal chateau of Vincennes, just east of Paris. And here you see a 17th century view of the chateau. This included men who had previously worked at the Chantilly manufactory, one of whom apparently stole the formula for porcelain and took it with him to Vincennes, even though Vincennes would develop its own formula eventually. Regular production at Vincennes began around 1745, and that is the year in which King Louis XV granted the company a monopoly to make porcelain, quote, like that of the Meissen manufactory in Germany. And it was in Germany, at Meissen, where they had discovered kaolin in Saxony. This is in eastern Germany. And they had finally been able to produce true hard-paste porcelain in 1710. So the commission to the Vincennes manufactory was to make porcelain like that of Meissen. And initially, the manufactory did make works that were inspired by Meissen and inspired by works of Asian ceramics, but they would quickly move on to develop their own designs and their own patterns and colors and finishes. So our ability to tell the story of Vincennes has been greatly enhanced recently by an important long-term loan from the collector Adrian Sassoon in London, who has lent us 19 pieces of early Vincennes porcelain that help us to tell the story from the beginning of the manufactory until the earliest pieces we have in the permanent collection, which date to the early 1750s. So you see here in this cup and saucer, this is one of the rare pieces at Vincennes that is really copied in its form and decoration after works seen at Meissen. So at Meissen you would have seen this type of frame around a landscape scene such as this, and this type of floral ornamentation, and the entire shape is also based on one scene at Meissen. As I said, Vincennes would move on to develop its own forms and decoration, and this is a small chamber pot, exquisitely painted, with a rare representation of Asian-inspired design. And you see, if you look at it, here's a figure in sort of non-European costume, looking through the wrong end of a telescope. And so it has a sense of whimsy and fantasy to it. And when you turn it around at the front here, you see a fountain represented. And then on the back, I show you this because it's a little hard to see in the gallery. Here's a figure riding some sort of boat that is drawn by a swan. Again, this sense of fantasy and whimsy, and beautifully painted. Vincennes would work hard at developing a large palette of enamel colors, eventually coming up with a different palette of 60 colors that they could use, and they would become expert at painting on porcelain. And here you see on the left a rare shape as they're developing their floral painting. And where I mentioned before on the Chantilly piece, there are flaws in the manufacture here. There was a crack, a firing crack right there on the edge. And you see that the artist has imaginatively decided to paint what looks like a caterpillar or a worm that disguises it. And then on the right, you have a lidded sugar bowl with this fantastic floral painting, and again, insects and botanical type details being done. And this cup and saucer has an influence from Asia and or Meissen. If you look at this wonderful handle in the form of a lizard, you see it there, and that is based on, there are Chinese examples of pieces with three-dimensional lizards like that. The artists at Vincennes could have seen a Chinese example, or Meissen was also copying that form as well. But here they've mixed the sort of Asian influence with the European influence, and you see that the painted scene here and on the cup is based on European landscapes from the 17th century, which will be popular throughout the middle part of the century at Vincennes and later at Sèvres. And there's the cup. And these two pieces produced in 1749 and the early 1750s, these show the important influence of the French artist Francois Boucher, and his influence at Vincennes and Sèvres would be tremendous. And you see these are two early examples of his influence there. On this glass cooler, this is a pastoral scene that is copied after a famous Boucher design that was well known through engravings. And then on the right, this plate with a figural scene, which was rare on Vincennes ceramics, of a gardener, a young boy as a gardener, which is based on a very specific Boucher design. And this lidded bowl and dish are remarkable on so many levels. The painting is extraordinary. If you look at the painting of the floral garlands and the bird in the center, and also the finial of the lid of the bowl in the form of these shells, leeks, mushroom as you see, and this fish, very expressive fish. And then this is a large sort of ornamental vase, a rare shape, made of Vincennes around 1750. And it's referred to as a vase du Plessis, and this refers to one of the very important artists at Vincennes, Jean-Claude Duplessis, who was a goldsmith and silversmith from Italy who settled in Paris and worked at Vincennes and then at Sèvres, providing all the basic Rococo shapes. And you see his influence, his background as a goldsmith and silversmith in these wonderfully florid designs. And in this piece with its the wonderfully molded floral handles. And so every element of this vase, the modeling, the wonderful painting of the flowers, the delicate gilding, and this blue ground color are sort of typical of what Vincennes and then Sèvres will become most famous for, is these large decorative vases with different ground colors and wonderful gilding and wonderful enamel painting. So then we get to around 1752, and this is the earliest pieces of Vincennes in our permanent collection, another écuelle or a lidded bowl and dish. And Vincennes and then Sèvres would be famous for the different ground colors. That's the color, this background color, which this is blue, and this is underglazed blue, referred to as bleu lapis, after lapis lazuli. So it's applied under the glaze. And when you look at some of the details, you can see, especially when you're up in the gallery, you can see sort of a blue haze in the background on the reserves, as we call them, which is where some of the powder from the underglazed blue has settled. But also in looking at the details, you see how quickly Vincennes is developing the art of painting, but also gilding. This wonderfully detailed gilt decoration, and you see there's the design of the lid. And this is a large vase with a different ground color, which was referred to as bleu celeste. Here again, you have the wonderful ground color gilding and this painting by Armand, who was one of the chief painters at Vincennes and Sèvres. And you can see the wonderful detail of the bird in this landscape with flowers and even giving a sense of distance behind. And these are a pair of vases, and if you look at them, you can see they have holes along in the lid and around the shoulder, and this is for the scent of potpourri to be able to escape, so they're potpourri vases. And again, they have the bleu lapis, the blue underglazed blue decoration, the wonderful gilding around the scenes, and then in this case, this painting of the figures of these cherubs is based on works by the artist Francois Boucher, which you see here. This one cherub is directly inspired by the figure in this engraving here. The shape is referred to in French as the Potpourri Pompadour, and they're named after Madame de Pompadour, who you see on the right here. And it is in 1752 that King Louis XV becomes a prime shareholder at the Vincennes Manufactory, and Madame de Pompadour was his mistress at the time, a very influential patron of the arts, and particularly interested in the Vincennes Manufactory, which then was moved in 1756 to a brand new building in the town of Sèvres, just west of Paris. And here you see the building. This was a remarkable thing to have done. Most of these porcelain manufactories had been founded in sort of existing structures like the old castle at Meissen or the old castle at Vincennes or outbuildings at Chantilly. And in this case, the king, who had taken on, by 1759, he would take on full ownership of the manufactory, had commissioned this building to be built, which was very large and purpose-built for the manufactory, with different workshops for modelers and painters and different painters of figures and landscapes and birds and flowers. So it was incredibly well organized. And part of that, I think, will be reflected in the great success and the wonderfully refined artistry of the pieces that the Sèvres manufactory will produce. So this Urim basin was made at Sèvres in 1758 and has this remarkable pink ground color, and it was a color for which the manufacturer would be well known. And here again you see the influence of Duplessis in the wonderful sort of goldsmith type form of the vessel and the basin in the form of these sort of lily flowers and sprays of natural-like ornament. And that's also seen in this pair of vases. They were even referred to in French as Potpourri Fontaine. That's because the overall form is meant to look like a sort of water fountain with sprays of water along the sides and then water overflowing the edge of a basin or of a fountain. And they are very complex. They are in 3 pieces. You have a large central section that sits inside a base and has a lid. The lid is pierced and the shoulder of the center section is pierced. So again, these were for potpourri. But then the base also has these holes, which are meant for flowering bulbs. And then you could add water through the lozenge-shaped holes in the front and back when you had flowers in them. And they're not only elaborate in their shape, but also in their decoration. They have 3 ground colors being used, which is very rare. You have pink, blue, and green. And then the direct decoration is extraordinarily painted, these chinoiseries, these Asian-inspired scenes, which are attributed to the most important decorator at Sèvres, Charles-Nicolas Daudin. And it's very interesting to see the vase and understand that the painters at Sèvres were drawing inspiration from numerous sources. In this case, they were inspired by a design by Francois Boucher again. Here, they've loosely, not explicitly copied the design. This is loosely copied from a print by Boucher, showing these Asian figures. That again is loosely based on an actual Chinese woodblock print from the late 17th century, a copy of which Boucher had in his collection. So he was directly inspired from an Asian source, and then to make his design, and then that was adapted on the front of these vases. And then it's wonderful in the news display to be able to walk around these pieces and really understand the wonderful 3-dimensional aspect of them. And you can see the backs have these sort of flowers in a sort of Asian type design and motif, and the wonderful sides, again, where you can see the spray of the form. And this boat-shaped vase is one of the most extraordinary models produced at Sèvres. You see the entire lid is for potpourri again, so the entire lid is pierced. And so how incredibly difficult this must have been to make in the leather hard stage of the porcelain production. You have to literally carve this all out, and then there's a large chance that it will collapse in the kiln. So the very completion of it is a sort of tour de force. And then the painting, again, is extraordinary on the front. This is, again, by Daudin, showing scenes based on Dutch 17th century paintings, which seems funny to us on this 18th century object, but 17th century Dutch paintings were very popular with collectors in France throughout the 18th century. And then this tray, which is again by Daudin, so you can see how gifted he is as a porcelain painter, again adapting a design by Boucher. But it's not just the scene that's amazing, it's this border around it with the pink, this trellis pattern, and then not just this border, but even the border of this tiny motif along the edge. And this was a plaque made to be set on the top of a table. And then you see this attention to patterns and wonderful patterns in this cup and saucer. which has this amazing, it's not seen on many pieces at SEV. It's incredibly complicated, and you may get dizzy looking at it. But this wonderful Rococo pattern, it's done by you have a ground color of pink, and then on top of that you put a slight layer of blue, and then scrape the blue away to get these incredible flourishes and to get this design. And then if that isn't enough, the different artists went on and added gilded decorations. So you see here a gilded, like trellis decorated here, the Œil de Perdrix we call it, and then just dots. So 3 different gilding patterns within this overall pattern. And then as we progress through the works at SEV, we'll move from the Rococo period to the Neoclassical, and this pair of beautiful vases in egg-shaped. They have are sort of the great ingenuity of the design. You see the basket work weave, and this is all done in the porcelain at the base here, and of the handles, and that they have these little eggs on the top that are resting in nests of wheat as well. And you can see the size. You can see how beautifully modeled this is. But then look at this is a detail of the lid, and you can see this incredible pattern on the ground, which is all made up. It's sort of mind-boggling. These tiny dots that all have to be hand-placed on this blue ground that give it this overall sheen, sort of satin-like sheen to the overall effect. And the more purely neoclassical vase, and the remarkable sophistication in the design and the ornamentation and the decoration of these pieces. This vase, you can see, has a beautiful design of gilt dots, which in these flutes alternate with plain flutes, a plain husk and a decorated flute, and then a plain flute with a gilt husk, and creates this beautiful overall design. And this is a picture of some of the new display at the Getty with a group of our neoclassical vases. And finally at SEV, they were able to discover deposits of kaolin around Limoges, down in central France, and were finally able to make hard paste porcelain around 1770. And this is one of a pair of vases that are made of hard paste porcelain, so you're getting that brilliant white, and hard paste works well with some of the gilding and enamel techniques. And in this case, they're recalling enameling on the Asian enamel. You see this wonderful detail of a butterfly or insect that's on the side of this vase. And this pair of vases, in this case, again, in hard paste, and here, the background, the very detailed background is by one of the few female artists we know to have worked for SEV, named Geneviève Taillandier, and it's a very detailed pattern of having a pink ground with white dots. I don't know if I got a detail. With white dots with a gold dot in the center of each one of those. So you can imagine how difficult it is to even finish that, and let alone the beautiful painting of the piece. So this pair of vases is wonderful in displaying how each of these works is the product of numerous highly trained artists. In this case, you would have had the modeler who created the form, finished the form, or you would have a designer who would have designed it to begin with, and then the modeler who modeled it, finished it, the repairer who finished the details, and then the painters who did the landscape scenes on the front is different from the painter who did the landscape scene on the side, which is actually Geneviève Taillandier's husband, Vincent. And when you look at the overall design, you can see how clever it is. They've designed the handles to look like they're gilt bronze, even though they're all made out of porcelain. So when you look at the side, what they've cleverly done is to imagine as if these were gilt bronze and had been added to the porcelain vase, they would have covered up a full floral bouquet here. So they're pretending that it's actually, they've covered up something that's not there by pretending that that these are actually gilt bronze. That's just sort of wonderful detail, I think. And then this plate, which was made to showcase the wonderful quality of the different decorators at Sèvres, the painters, the gilders, the people who did the background colors. And we talk a lot and mention a lot of these artists, and we know a lot of the names of the different artists at Sèvres because they would mark their pieces, and also the archives were quite good. And when you look at the back, we know the names because of some of the marks on the back. So here you have, at the top, this triangle. That is the mark for the painter Capel. And the crossed L's here, that's the factory mark for the Sèvres manufactory. The double E is for the date letters. That's the date letters for the year 1782. This is a cursive L and an R refers to the painter Laroche, and HP here refers to the gilder Prévost. And there were also often incised marks in the porcelain body itself, which are hard to see, which would be for the person who formed or finished the piece. And here you can see some of the incredible gilt details. So as you go on, you can see how beautifully burnished and detailed the gilding is here on this plate, and even the floral painting, and also this background of brown with just these flecks of gold that give it this wonderful, wonderful finish. And the artists at Sèvres became expert at painting patterns, and you see that in this tea service. And there is the lidded sugar bowl, and here you can see the wonderful detail in this molded ribbon. This is all in the porcelain. And when you are up in the gallery and look at it closely, you'll be able to see that it has, it's all pierced, very subtly pierced here and even around here. That helps give it this liveliness and this wonderful aspect to the finished piece and the beautiful painting of the garlands and the gilding. And this is one of recent acquisitions that we were able to get from a private British collector. And it shows how expert Sèvres was at doing these very decorative patterns. And in this case, it's a very utilitarian shape. This is referred to as a gobelet litron, which is from a shape basically for measuring out grain, a type of scoop for measuring out grain, but in this case has been transformed into this amazing luxury object. And in this case, pieces weren't made necessarily to be used, they were meant to be collected for their extraordinary and different decorations. And you see that as well with this cup and saucer that was made around 1782 to mark to commemorate the birth of the Dauphin, who is the heir to the throne of France. So it was the first son of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI in 1781. And the heir to the throne in France is referred to as the Dauphin, the dolphin. So literally in France, dolphins do become kings. And you can see it reflected in the crown on the front, and then the dolphins in the saucer, and the specially designed dolphin-shaped handle. And I think that's a good point to move into talking about the exhibition, since we've come to the point of Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. So I'm going to discuss this marvelous exhibition we have at the moment called Porcelain from Versailles, Vases for a King and Queen. Here you see the entrance to the exhibition. And this is part of an important artistic partnership we have with the Palace of Versailles. The museum has a desk by the cabinet maker Riesner, which you see on the right, which was commissioned by Marie Antoinette for Louis XVI, and for his use in his private study or cabinet at the Petit Trianon. And the Petit Trianon is a mansion on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles that has been used for a retreat. And at the time that Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette became king and queen, the Petit Trianon was given to Marie Antoinette and was one of her main retreats away from court life and away from the palace. And she had this desk commissioned for a room there that would be used by the king. So this desk has been on long-term loan to the Palace of Versailles, where it is displayed in the room for which it was intended at the Petit Trianon. And in exchange, we've had some extraordinary loans, long-term loans for a year from the Palace of Versailles here at the Getty. And currently, we have in the 3 vases that I will discuss in just a minute. But to get back to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, there they are. Louis XVI, they were married in 1770. They became king and queen at the death of Louis XV in 1774. And there you see Louis XVI at about that time, and this lovely portrait of Marie Antoinette on the right from the mid-1780s. And this next slide is just Versailles to remind you of the palace and what it looks like. But like I said, in 1774, they became king and queen. But 4 years prior to that, and this is not in the exhibition, but I couldn't help showing it to you, it's this design of a fireworks display to celebrate the marriage of Louis XVI to Marie Antoinette in 1770. So if you imagine you're at the front of Versailles here, but turning and facing the garden, the design was so that you would see a fireworks display like this. But upon his accession to the throne, Louis XVI took a great interest in the Sèvres manufactory, and he continued his father's tradition of holding an annual exhibition at the end of the year in his private apartments for the latest works of the Sèvres manufactory, and members of the court and other visiting dignitaries would attend and were encouraged to buy things there. So they were both important patrons for the Sèvres manufactory. And upon becoming queen in 1774, the queen started commissioning the redecoration of her private apartments. And this is her sitting room at Versailles, where you see in here these 3 vases on this commode along the wall. And these are the 3 that we have in the exhibition today. Extraordinary vases in hard paste porcelain, purchased by the Queen by 1776 for a large sum of 3,000 livres. And they're the same egg shape that we saw earlier. In this case, it's the egg shape that was meant to be mounted in gilt bronze mounts. So here you have the vases. The porcelain is set in these extraordinary gilt bronze mounts. And you'll see some details of the gilt bronze here. And you see even these tassels, which have been fully modeled. You can see them as full sort of passementerie tassels. And the gilt bronze mounts are by Duplessis Fils, the son of Duplessis, who was a primary supplier of gilt bronze mounts to the Sèvres manufactory at the time. And then the extraordinary painting and decoration on the vases is done by an artist named Lescaut, and you can see the amazing gilding and the painting of the figures and even the very sophisticated color scheme that was used. And these are using Chinese motifs set against the brilliant white of the hard paste porcelain, is recalling this fascination with Asian porcelain. And here's the detail of one side of the front of the center vase, and you can see the extraordinary patterns that the artist was able to create on the costumes, each one being different. And here is the other side of the same vase. Again, here an influence is Boucher, and this is the print on the right that has been adapted by the artist, by Leico, to create this decoration. Again, it's been freely adapted. He hasn't copied the exact background, and he's had to come up with his own designs for the textiles. So these are all his own imagination. And then the lid of the center vase, and in this case, the figures are based on prints by another well-known French artist, Jean Piaumont. And you say this figure of a man holding music is based on this, obviously, this figure from a Piaumont engraving, etching, and this figure of a woman playing a lute is the source for this one. So you can see where there were the artists are specifically recalling the Piaumont designs, but also in other cases they were sort of inspired by Piaumont designs. This is one of the side vases showing children blowing bubbles, and here's a Piaumont print of children, Asian children playing bubbles. And we have these prints on loan from the Getty Research Institute, which has a large collection of Piaumont prints, and this is one of the ones we have on display at the moment, which gives you an idea of the type of print that these artists were being inspired by. And then moving on to the king. So we have two sets of vases in the exhibition. The first one we just saw, which was made for the queen, and then the second one made for the king. And when he became king, one of the first things he started to redecorate in his private apartments was his library. And this is the library which you see as it exists today. And here is the mantelpiece on which he acquired a set of 5 Sèvres vases in 1781, and they were placed on this mantelpiece in his private library. And 3 of the vases from this garniture of 5 are in the Getty's collection that were acquired in the 1980s. And you see these 3 vases here. And they had become separated from the other 2 vases from the garniture. At some point from the French Revolution to some point in the middle of the 19th century, they had become separated and ended up in different collections. And this pair of vases ended up at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore in the early 20th century. And then the 3 vases currently at the Getty were acquired by Jillian in the mid-1980s. So they've existed in these. The full garniture has been split between the 2 institutions. And one of the things I wanted to do with this exhibition was to bring the garniture back together again. So if you haven't seen it already, we'll have a big drum roll. And there they are, all back together again. So it's a very historic and moving moment for all of us porcelain nerds and specialists in Sèvres who can see the pieces all together, and you really get a sense of the scope of the composition and how all the proportions and the decoration are all meant to work together. So the vases are called Vase des Âges, and that refers to the vases of the ages. So you see these handles. In this case, they're not gilt bronze. They're in really beautifully executed gilt porcelain to look as if they're gilt bronze. And so each handle of each different size vase is of a different model. You have youth, sort of maturity, and old age is a bearded male. And then they are decorated with one of the most extraordinary and expensive types of decoration produced at Sèvres before the French Revolution, and that is this jeweled enameling, which you see here. You can see each element is a piece of gold foil that has been stamped with a pattern, and then on top of it is placed a drop of different colored enamel to give the sense of jewels. It's a very fragile technique and finish, so that the enamels often fall off. So when you look at them, you'll see these blank spots where some of the enameling is missing. But you can get a sense of how incredibly detailed and sophisticated the design of this jeweling is. It looks like real jewels with pendants that hang down and then become a part of the gilt frame for the scene in the middle. And then so the gilding is spectacular. The jeweled ornamentation is amazing. The painting of the figural scenes on the front is of the highest quality. In this case, the scenes all depict scenes from one of the king's, supposedly one of his favorite books, called The Adventures of Telemachus. And here you see a detail from the center vase with the scene showing the goddess Minerva protecting Telemachus from Venus and Cupid. So Minerva is protecting the sleeping Telemachus from Cupid's darts, so he won't be hit with one of the darts and then distracted by amorous thoughts when he's meant to be a more serious student. And other scenes from the book, Telemachus listening to a priest of the god of Apollo on the left, and Venus bringing Cupid to the sea nymph Calypso on the right. In the back of the Baltimore vases, at the top, his mentor persuades Telemachus to join a battle. And then on the left is Telemachus winning a chariot race. And the back of each vase has a different beautifully painted floral and fruit bouquet. And just to remember this set of vases that was meant to be on the mantelpiece in the king's private library here, imagine it there, and this is the original mantelpiece with these caryatids in the form of children, and so that it would echo with the figures on the vases. And then the literary subject matter on the front of the vases would have echoed with the subject of the entire room itself, the library. And then it was on the mantelpiece with a mirror behind so that you would be able to see the wonderful painting of the flowers on the back. So there's the back of the vases all together, and just imagine how rich it would be to have the vases on the mantelpiece, being able to see the decoration on the front and also the reflection of the vases of the back of the vases. And in the exhibition, we have it in a freestanding case so that you can see the fronts and the backs quite easily. But if you look at it from the side, you can even get the sense of the reflection and what it would look like if it was placed in front of a mirror. So as not part of the exhibition itself, but as in a related display, we have this incredible loan from the Huntington Library, Art Museum and Botanical Gardens in San Moreno. This extraordinary garniture of 3 pink ground vases that were likely also purchased by Marie Antoinette in 1782 with, again, the very rich decoration and jeweled enameling. And there aren't very many of these large-scale jeweled vases that were made at Sèvres. We know of 3 sets, the King set, which is currently on view at the Getty, and a set in the Wallace collection in London, and then these 3 vases at the Huntington in San Marino. And I thought it would be wonderful to have them here on site, so we at least had 2 of the sets on site during the run of the exhibition. And also to be able to get a close look at these remarkable vases. Here you see them on view in our galleries. And you'll be able to see up close some of the remarkable jeweled decoration, these cornucopia. You can really see how the design is stamped into the gold foil here, right there. Some of the gold jeweled decoration is even raised. This is embossed, this rosette here. And the painting, again, is very beautifully done on the front. This is after a famous painting by the French artist Carl Van Loo. And most exciting for me and my colleagues, though, is to be able to see the back of these vases. For, I guess, 100 years now, they've been displayed on top of a piece of furniture against a wall. So to have them down at sort of eye level, and to be able to see these remarkable landscapes on the back is a rare treat. And they will be here for the full year, again, the run of the exhibition, and just ending with one of these details of jewel decoration, in this case on the Huntington vases. And here you can see this remarkable pink ground color, this Taillandier type decoration with the pink, and then you have these purple dots and the gold dot in the center, and then the jeweled decoration, the stamped pattern on the gold. Here you can see the pattern that's been stamped on these side pieces, but the enamel has fallen out, so you can see the stamped pattern really well. And here you can see how it's meant to work. The sort of, you're meant to be able to see the stamped pattern through the enamel, so that it gives the sense of a carved or embossed or jewel. So that is, I'm sorry for the kind of quick run through the last bit, but I wanted to make sure and get through everything so that you were able to appreciate all the, oh look, more people came. That's wonderful. But I just want to thank, I have so many people to thank in regards to the exhibition, to our permanent displays, and to all of you watching. So I want to thank our amazing donors and lenders, the estate of Gillian Wilson, Mary Lou Boone, Adrian Sassoon, the Palace of Versailles, the Walters Art Museum, the Huntington Library, Art Museum and Botanical Gardens, and the Getty Research Institute. It has been wonderful working together with all of you, and we are deeply grateful for all of your loans and for your generosity. I want to thank the immensely talented colleagues here at the Getty Museum who made these beautiful new displays possible and the beautiful images possible, and to those who kindly facilitated this talk, and to thank all of you attendees near and far for your attention. I hope you appreciate the great French porcelain moment we're having at the Getty right now, and with the exhibition, being able to appreciate, we have these two magnificent sets of vases that show the remarkably sophisticated hard-paste porcelain, what they were able to achieve at Sevin, hard-paste porcelain, and in soft paste, right at the very, right before the French Revolution. And then over the course of the whole talk, I hope you've been able to appreciate the great strides, technical strides, really sort of mind-boggling strides that were made in the production of French porcelain from the beginning of the 18th century to the end. So please spread the word about these exhibitions and these displays. And for those attending remotely, please make plans to visit. There's plenty of time. The exhibition is up for another year. It doesn't close until March 3rd of next year, so there's plenty of time to get here. But also, if you can't get here, please go and visit your local museum with decorative arts. And I hope that this talk will have encouraged you to look closely at these remarkable objects and to appreciate what goes into making them. And for all those in the lecture hall, I invite you to go with me up to the galleries to see the real objects. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you have there. So I just thank you for your attention.